Hashem, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's shir from Rabbi Yaakov Zev Smith on Amos Chayav Little Yod of Pam Shenis Besuda. When is the second Netilas Yodayim required by Suda? Rabbi Grace Chus is sponsoring a shir called Irgin Shir Torah 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com. Rabbi Smith.
A question that we often hear until Yodayim is, like we just mentioned, when is a new Netilah required? For example, someone went to the Beis Hakisei during the Suda. When he comes back, of course he has to wash his hands. Does he have to wash his hands kalocha, like Netilas Yodayim? Or is it enough just to wash his hands like after the bathroom? Sometimes you diaper a child during the Suda. It happens often, a person washes and before he makes the Netilas Yodayim, he speaks, he talks, he's mafsik. What's the procedure? And the common question is, after you washed either one hand or both, someone who didn't wash until Yodayim touches your hand. So the question, I guess, and these plus many more, is when is a new Netilas Yodayim required? So as our derech ways, we tried to find, a yesai to go through the sugya. I'll ask a simple question that's not as simple as it sounds. Let's say in the worst scenario, I wash Netilas Yodayim kadas ukadin, and someone who didn't yet wash touched my hand. So if I ask, that's the worst thing, you have to wash over your hands. My question is why? You'll say, but he's tamei. True. So, lamaisa, after I wash and I dry my hands, and let's say I'm making a simcha, a chasana, a mitzvah, a bris, and during the Suda, people wish him mazlav. Can I shake their hand? They didn't wash Netilas Yodayim. How about during the dancing? Do I have to ask, did you wash Netilas Yodayim? I can't dance with you? The pshat seems to be that really, we call it the hands are tamei. That's really inaccurate. The hands are not, they are tamei, but Netilas Yodayim doesn't take off tumah. So what is the problem when my hands are wet and someone who didn't wash touches my hands? Why did that make the Netilah puzzle worse than after I washed and I made hamaitzi and I shake the same hand that's tamei that I'm allowed to continue eating, don't have to wash over? So the emes is that this is a Mishnah. The Mishnah Yodayim Perek Beis Mishnah Gimel talks about a common scenario which hopefully could be avoided, but when a person uses a keli that doesn't have two handles, doesn't have any handle sometimes, and bekitza he washes his right hand kadas ukadin, and then he's shifting the kais, the keli, from one hand to the other because he doesn't have a handle, and the right hand that was washed touched the left hand that was not yet washed. So the Mishnah says in this very case, then the right hand that was washed halacha becomes puzzle. You have to wash over again, and this is quoted in Kuf Samach Bey Siv Dalet. So we see that a hand that was washed becomes tamei. You have to wash over. So now my question is, after you're in the middle of a suda, why are you allowed to shake someone's hand? Why are you allowed to touch someone by dancing? He didn't wash yet. So the chiluk is obvious but important. And basically, that when someone is in the middle of a netilah, before he dries his hands, he didn't yet complete the netilah, then someone who is tamei could be metama the netilah. During the netilah, when there's still water, amanas tayvech, amanas latfiach, then the netilah becomes tamei. Of course, the chiluk is that when I made a Netilas Yodayim and I made a moitzi and I'm shaking someone's hand or dancing with someone, even though he is tamei officially, he didn't wash the Netilas Yodayim, but my netilah was chal, and it can't be ruined. It's only when my hands are still wet, I am still mid netilah, then if I touch someone that's tamei, then my netilah becomes tamei. The Shulchan Aruch in Kuf Samach Bey Siv Daled quotes this and adds a big chiddush. Let's talk about the same scenario. I wash my hands and someone who didn't wash touched my wet hands. So my netilah is puzzle. What do I do now? So we would say, what's the problem? Take a cup of water and wash over the other hand. Wash over again. You don't have to dry your hands, because every Netilas Yodayim, you do that. You first wash a little bit, that's called mayim tmeim. Then you wash again, and you wash off the mayim tmeim. So why not do it here? But the Mechaber says no. If you wash kedas sukadin and someone touched your wet hands, you have to first dry your hands and then start again. What's the chilik? So the Mechaber explains. Mayim tmeim comes off because you have mayim shniyim. You washed once, that's mayim tmeim. The second time, the mayim shniyim cleans the mayim rishonim, that's tamei. Here, why is the water on my hand tamei? Not from mayim, not mayim rishonim. It's from a tumah bachutz. Someone else that didn't wash touched my wet hands. Mayim shniyim cannot clean hands that are tamei mi bachutz. It only, and let's put it very bluntly, mayim shniyim can wash off mayim rishonim. Mayim shniyim cannot wash off mayim tmeim. So here we see very clearly, based on a Mishnah, that if you wash kedas sukadin and someone, when your hands are still wet, touch that hand, you have to first dry your hands and start again. So we see the aside of a Netilah becoming puzzle, and we understand why if someone during the Suda touches you or you shake his hand, there is no problem. You're allowed to shake his hand and don't worry. Now let me add a little more geschmack to this before we continue La Maisa. Let's say I'm during a Suda, I finished the fish, and let's say I have the minig, I wash my hands between fish and meat, and my hands are still wet, and my mouth, someone says, oh, mazel tov, and shakes my hand. Do I have to wash over? Because now my hands are wet, and he touched wet hands. Is that like the original Mishnah? The answer is one big chilik, because it's not mayim of a Netilah. It's mayim of a chumrah, of a fish. When is the Mishnah saying that your Netilah becomes puzzle? I'll put it very clearly. Your Netilah becomes puzzle when you have mayim of a Netilah that was still wet and not yet dried. But water on the hands happens to be from fish, is not my Netilah. So then, even if someone touches it, Zok Tehelig Chazenish in Siman Chafei, Sif Yud Gimel, it doesn't pass the Netilah. So in other words, basically, the problem is when you have a mayim of a Netilah before you dried it, and we'll soon see it's wet, Teifeach Amanas La Tfiach, and someone who is Tamei, didn't wash, touches it, then you have to start all over again, first dry and then wash again. I'll give you another example, a common case. This is very common in a shul, in a yeshiva. Two people finish washing and they're both going for the same paper towel. And they crash. So two wet hands touch. So the halach is pashut, no one has to wash over. Taka, they're both wet, but there's no tamei. So that's l'chari not a problem. Now let's say someone who finished drying his hands touched my wet hands before I dried it. Again, there's no problem. Because even though my hands are wet, but he has kosher hands. His hands are tar. So basically, I would put it very clearly that during the Netilah, when you have wet hands from the Netilah, if someone that is not tar touches, then there's a new chiyuv of Netilas Yodayim. So this explains basically what we said, the chilik between that and during a meal. Now, let's say it's B'char is pashit, but I must mention it. Let's say someone who's not even eating just came to wish me mazel tov, and he touched my hand when it was still wet from the Netilah. So there is a shita, the Mishnah Rishon on that Mishnah in Yodayim. He says if he's not part of the Netilah, so what are you worrying about? He has no chiv until Yodayim. He can't ruin your hands. But he himself points out that the Shulchan Aruch doesn't seem to say that, because if you have hands that were not washed and you touch someone that did wash, then it passes the Netilah. So we have the Mechaben Shulchan Aruch based on a Goyis Maimoni. Not only if my left hand touched my right hand is a problem, but if someone that didn't wash touches my hand, I would have to actually dry my hands and wash over again. Now the Yamshel Shloime in Chul and Perik Chesim Am Gimel has his famous chiddush that if I already wash kalach and someone touched my hands, I have to wash over, no doubt about that. But I don't have to dry my hands first. Because there's no mayim, tmeim here, it's just someone that touched it from mi bachutz. But the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah do not say that, so let's be clear. If someone washed kedin, and either his unwashed hand touched his washed hand, or someone that didn't wash at all touched his washed hand, he has to first dry his hands, and again, start again the Netilas Yodayim. So far there's no problem of a bracha, because he didn't make a bracha yet. Because again, you make a bracha after Netilah. Next question, or questions is, who can ruin my Netilah? Let's say a young child touched my hand when my hands are wet. Let's say a case of a person has a guy aide helping him wash. And the guy touched the yid's hands when they're wet. So this is not in Shulchan Aruch, but there is a quoted halachas ketanos, chelik aleph reish ayin hey, who asks a question, a general question. Were they geyser tumah on a child's hand? Maybe he's leigi lechinuch, he's not tummy. So he says emphatically, Misha yotza la'avir hareyu kechasin shalim, which means as soon as he's born, a newborn has hilchas tumah. Now he's not talking about our very case, but the Ben Ish Chai and Shmini Tezai and the Kaf HaChaim and Lamed Aleph and many others say that from here we see that a Yiddish hand is metama and Netilah, even if he's lo yigi lechinuch. So he's not mechuyev in Netilas Yodayim, but tumah is a metzias. The Tzitz Eliezer and Chelik Zayin Simon Beis has more of an arichis, but basically the yisoid is if a child who's lo yigi lechinuch, he has no chiv Netilah, but his hands are tamei. If he touched your wet hand, your washed wet hand, it's like any other yid touched your hand, you have to dry your hands and start again. What to me was a chiddush, but really it's not a chiddush. Let's say a guy touched a yid's hand that was during the Netilah. So we'll see, a guy is even worse, but it's not true. Because we find the Gabi Tumah that a Yiddish Shemeis is Matama, a Goyish Shemeis is not Matana. The svara is if there's no kedusha to begin with, then there's no tumah, and that's why the Cyrus Tshuva in Chelik Aleph Siman Ayin Vav has this suffix. Let's say a common case, a yid has a goyish aide that helps him wash, and the guy is not careful and touches his wet hand. Does he have to wash over? So the Cyrus Tshuva says could be a guy is not tamei because he's too tamei. There's no hilchas tumah amazed by a guy. Other Gemara spoil, not a guy. So he has this suffix that maybe if the guy touches the Yiddish washed hand, it doesn't passel the Netilah. So the Rivers Ephraim, Chelik Aleph, Kuf Chav Gimel, it says it's mashmel lahakil. So avada, if it's hard for the Yid to wash over, he can rely on this, believe it or not, chiddush, that a katan, even a baby, is matame Netilah. But lahavla guy would not be matame. Next question. We said you touch a hand that wasn't washed, you have to wash over. What does that mean exactly? And I'll give you an example. L'chayra, if this hand is wet and someone touched it, so until the wrist is like you touched my hand, I have to wash over. Let's say my wet hand touched someone's hand above the wrist. That's called the arm, from the elbow to the wrist. I touched that part of the hand. Does that pass on my Netilah? So if it would be a makom mechusa, so it passes the Netilah for a different reason, makom mechusa. I'm talking about from the wrist to the arm. So the truth is that if there's no chiv Netilah on that area, so it doesn't passel. What's the difference? The same person. The teretz says, had it been tumah v'tahara, like the conventional tumah v'tahara, so then the person is tamei from head to toe. There's no difference of arm, hand. But it's not a conventional tumah. Because the truth is, if it's conventional tumah, then Netilas Yodayim is not going to help. It's tumas Yodayim for achila. Whatever needs Netilah could passel if it's not washed. So there's no doubt about it, from the wrist until the arm does not passel the Netilah. But I'll tell you a bigger chiddush. I don't know if the Olam is aware of this chiddush, but in the end of Siman Kuf Samach Aleph, the Shulchan Aruch has 2 days. What do we have to wash for Netilas Yodayim? We wonder, what do you mean? From the wrist down. But it's not true. There are shitas that hold you only have to wash the fingers. From the finger until the knuckle. Because Yodayim askani is, you touch with your fingers the food. But the hand, the palm, on both sides, doesn't have to be washed. The Shulchan Aruch says, Reuired linig, to wash the entire hand, v'chein haminig. But I saw in one of the Heintige Svarim, the Bechas Shamayim, he says, let's say you touch someone's hand, not the fingers, you touched his palm, either top or bottom. According to those sheets, you don't have to wash that area, it doesn't pass you on Netilah. So if you touch someone else's fingers that was not washed, avadi you have to wash. But if you just touched his hand, what we call it, either the palm or the upper part of the hand, then it's possible that you don't have to wash over. Now, of course, we are machma to wash over, but we'll soon see that there is a tzad to be mekel, that it's not considered a chi of Netilah on that area. Question. Let's say you're not sure. You walk by someone, you brush by someone, you have a suffix if you touched a makom that was not washed, and a suffix you have to rewash. So the Mishnah Berurah and Siman Kuf Samach Sif Cotton Nun Gimel, regarding any suffix if you have to rewash, he's talking about a suffix has Hesach Hadas, suffix Naga Makom Metunaf, and he makes a cloud. If you wash Kedin, you have a suffix if the Netilah became puzzle. At most is a suffix the Rabbanon. You have a Cheskes Tahara, and you don't have to worry. So suffix Netilah then have to rewash. Question. You washed your hands, you dried your hands. Before you had a chance to make hamoitzi, someone with tamei hands, who didn't yet wash, touches your freshly washed hands. So you'll say, well, he's tamei, now I'm tamei. Wrong. As we said earlier, it's not a din of tum of a tahara. It's if you are mid-Netilah, your hands are still wet, and someone touched your hands, then you have to wash over. Our case, your hands are dry. In fact, the Paiskim say that has to be wet kalacha. If your hands are a little moist, but it's not teifeach amanas latviach, if you touch that wet part, it will not make something else wet, then you're not wet. The lashon the mechab is ba'oidon lachus min hamayim. It has to be wet. Wet means teifeach amanas latviach. Now, very often a person is in the middle of drying and someone touched his hand and it's not amanas latviach. That's not a problem in the Netilah. Now, I mentioned earlier, now we understand that let's say I washed for a Suda and the people shake my hand or want to dance, I'm allowed to touch them even though they are tamei. Now, that's mitzad halacha without a suffix. The Paiskim quote the Ur Tzadikim, Amaram Paparish, who says that even though you're in the middle of the Suda and your hands are already dry, don't touch someone's hands if they're still wet and he's tamei. L'mashal, let's say someone comes from the bathroom and he wishes you mazel tov, and his hands are wet enough because now he shook your hands are wet. And I'm Papa said you should wash over. Even though it's during the Suda, it's a chumrah. Now that's a halbatzara. The Shraga Meir Gil Lamadalid and the Kamar and Shulchan Atar Sivav says they're a medaktikim, the Chassidim V'Anshe Ma'isa, that during a Suda, from washing till benching, they won't touch anybody's hands that wasn't washed, even if his hands are dry. In other words, mamish this case, you make a simcha, a bris, a mitzvah, a chasana, throughout the entire Suda, someone says, mazel tov, you have to say, did you wash this daim? No, you didn't? Okay, hi. You can't shake his hand. You want to dance with someone? You have to first ask him if he washed the Netilas Yodayim. Now that's Chassidim V'Anshe Ma'isa. But for the rest of us, we're more focused on Kvayda Adam. You're making a simcha, someone shakes your hand, don't make him feel like he's unwanted. Once your hands are dry, the Netilah was effective, and it can't become puzzle. But again, there are those medaktikim that don't touch anybody's hands if it wasn't washed. The next group of questions is really challenging because mitzad echad it's negeya, and mitzad sheni it's not really so mafurish. And that is, let's say I washed kedas, I made a bracha. My hands are still wet because you make a bracha before the niguv. Then someone came along and touched my hand. So again, till now I spoke about you have to wash over, dry and wash over, big deal. Now I made a bracha, and you make a bracha when it's still wet and someone touched it. So the chayra zil basa taima. You're basically back to square one. Your hands were not washed. I mean, they were washed, but they were puzzled. So it's not mefurish. Obviously, it's so pashut. The question is, which way is it pashut? So it's easy to understand that if you assume that the Netilah is pasul, so again, you're back to square one. And that's halacha l'maisa. If someone washed, and he made a bracha, and before he dried it, it stands, someone touched his hands, he has to dry his hands, wash again, and make a new bracha. The chiddush we have here is the Mishnah Berurah in Sif Cotton Mem Tes quotes a Chayadam Nishmas Adam Kuf in Si Klal Mem Sif Cotton Aleph, who says from a different angle. And he says there are shittas that hold, if I wash my hand with the revius, which typically we do today, even if someone touches me, it doesn't become possible. Now I didn't mention that till now because we don't paskin that way. But there is a sheet that if I wash with the revius, it can't be affected. So even though we don't paskin like that, but says the Chayadam, but when you're going to have to wash over to make a bracha, whoa, not so fast. Because some shittas hold that it didn't pass the Netilah. Now if I do a machmer, that's why I didn't mention that shitta. But regarding a bracha, we'll say it's at least a sabal, the suffix bracha is the hakal, and dry your hands, wash over, but don't make a new bracha. So that's how we see. Again, today, typically we use a revius on each hand. The revius is not that much, 3+ ounces. So you'll definitely dry your hands, definitely wash over, but don't make a new bracha. Now, someone washed both hands, and someone touched his right hand, lamashal, when it's still wet. Does he have to wash both hands, or only wash the right hand? So here logic dictates, and that's the truth, that it's not a package deal. If the right hand is tamei, so wash the right hand. So you'll have to dry the right hand and rewash the right hand, but don't have to wash over the left hand. Just like if your hand touched a makam tunif, so you have to wash that hand, not both hands. So too, if your hand touched someone else that didn't wash, just wash that hand and don't have to bother washing the other hand. The next group of questions is negeya, and again, not klar al-chayr in the paiskim. And that is a person washed kedasu kedin, and he spoke out. He talked. Where do you go from here? So the emes is until now, and I want to make this point, when you washed and someone touched your wet hand, he was metama your hands, metama your Netilah, because he's tamei. Now we have a different scenario. I washed both hands. Before I made the bracha, after I made the bracha, I spoke out. So think about it. Freeze the moment. You'll see this is challenging. Because nothing changed regarding the Netilah. The Netilah is kasha. What's my only problem? I'll tell you. Hefsik. What does it mean, hefsik? Typically, this is not something that we ever think about. Because every hefsik that we're familiar with, you make a bracha, ner Chanukah, l'mashal. And before you light, you speak. So there's a brick wall between the bracha and the mitzvah. So the bracha becomes spoiled. So you have to make another bracha. Because the bracha was puzzled. Here, it's very different. It's very modern, in fact. I wash kedasu kedin. Before I made a bracha, I spoke. I was mafsik. So where do I go from here? Wash again? Why wash again? That doesn't passel the Netilah. You're right. I violated the Gemara, taking the Netilah bracha. But it doesn't passel the Netilah. What's wrong with the Netilah? Why should I wash again? What am I gaining? The only problem is the same brick wall. But it's in a fakerta situation. There's a brick wall between the Netilah and the bracha. So, don't make a bracha. Eskazun teheitim. And that's correct. There's nothing wrong with doing that. The only issue with that is that then you're going to violate what the Marshal calls a amein gadol. Marshal is in a different context, but it's quoted in the Taz and Siman Tafkuf Samaches. To do a mitzvah without a brach is an amein gadol. Here, if you're going to just dry your hands and make a moitzi and eat, the Netilah was good, but you ended up doing a bracha, doing a mitzvah without a bracha. And that seems to be the problem. So here, it's an unusual situation. But one thing I will say, and this, the Noid Yehuda writes about his lomdim, he calls them lomdim, that make a terrible mistake. And this is the Noid Yehuda in the Drashos, in Drushi Yatzlach, Drush Dalid. He says, I see people that after they make a Tilas Yodayim, they're waiting for someone to finish washing to make a moitzi. Let's say a father's waiting for all the children after his Yodayim to make a moitzi. So they're all sitting and waiting to make a moitzi. Nobody talks before moitzi. No one talks. But after they wash the Tilas Yodayim, before they make the bracha, says Lashon is afilu alomdim talk between the Netilas Yodayim and the Bechas Netilas Yodayim. Zogt Noid Yehuda, that's a hefsek amah. If you washed and before you made a bracha you spoke out, you no longer make a bracha. And he says you have to wash a second time. Now this is mysterious. Truly not to be mafsik. You're ruining the bracha. Why do you have to wash a second time? So the Paiskim, I saw the Chuvas Hanagis Chelik Beis Kuf Tezvav and the Betzina Rav and Chelik Hey Mem Dalid both say that really the Netilah is not puzzle. But if you're going to proceed and just dry your hands and make hamoitzi, you ended up being Mekayim a mitzvah without a bracha. So what should I do? Watch this. Dry your hands, then take your hand and touch a makam betunif. You'll have a new chivat Tilas Yodayim. Then wash like a mensch. Wash, make a bracha, don't talk, and ask his own to hate. What are you gaining with that effort, l'chayr and futility? You're gaining that you're going to wash and make a bracha. You're not going to do an oven gadol. And he says that's pshat the Rabbi Yehuda. You have to wash a second time. Bir adav, you have to wash to get a new bracha. So this point, I think we have to highlight that after you washed, before you made a bracha, is the worst hefsek. You're making a wall between the mitzvah and the bracha, and that's a terrible no-no. And the Rav in Kuf Samachei Aleph, in a few words, says the same Yisai like the Noid Yehuda. People don't talk between Tilas Yodayim and a moitzi, but it's worse to talk between Tilas Yodayim and the bracha. So here we see a tremendous chiddush. If someone washed and before he made the bracha he was mafsik, he technically, the Netilah is perfectly kosher, he could proceed and make a moitzi and eskazon to hate, but that's not the right thing to do. Dry your hands, touch a makam betunif, start again, and do it kalocha. Why isn't that a goyim bracha shein tzricha? This whole procedure, the teretz is it's tzricha, because you don't want to do a mitzvah without a bracha. The Kaf HaChaim in Siman Kuf Nun Ches, Yivkot and Pei Hey, discuss a different scenario. Someone that washed kid and realized, I didn't make a bracha yet. The hands are dried, it's too late. So what should he do? L'chari could eat, ask his own to eat. So the Kaf HaChaim do better than that. Mimatama your hands, start again, make a bracha, and ask his own to eat. Also, it's the same term, ain't a bracha in a because you want to live like a kid, a mitzvah, you're allowed to be bracha and create this new situation. Oh. But I have a better eitzah. Let's say I washed, my hands are wet, I should have kept quiet, but I spoke. Now I can make a bracha, right? Why don't I be a little creative? And I'll say, in my mind, of course, don't talk, you talked enough. I'll say, I'm going to now make a bracha. What's the bracha chal on? There's a brick wall between the bracha and the Netilah. But since my hands are still wet, and the Mechaber in Kuf Nun Ches says that we make a bracha before the niguv, the drying, because the niguv is part of the mitzvah. So I'll be creative. Here I'm going to make the bracha, and it's going on the niguv. So I will ask the yasim for the niguv, and I don't have to bother drying my hands, be metam and washing again. Does that work? So Chiddush Tvi, the Avnei Yoshvei, Chelik Daled, Yotes quotes Rabbi Yashiv. That's a good eitzah. That you can make a bracha lechatchila on just the ma'isa niguv. But the ma'isa, this is a chiddush that's hard to accept for two reasons. First of all, the Mishnah Berurah in the end of Kuf Nun Ches says that if you use a revius, you don't need a niguv. Why do you have to have an iguv, drying, li'ikuva? Because the mayim tmeim, even though you wash the second time. But if you use initially a mayim of a revius, there's no mayim tmeim, and you don't need an iguv. So how could you rely on an iguv that's really unnecessary now? Who washes less than a revius? And in the Mishnah, in the end of Kuf Nun Ches spells this out, that if you use a revius, you don't need an iguv. So then it's hard to believe that the niguv becomes part of the Netilah that justifies a bracha. Also, even like the marshal that holds you always have to dry your hands, that's because, as his lashon is, because al tzmos, it's not clean to eat with wet hands. But no one will say that it's so much part of the Netilah that it justifies making a bracha. So what did you do? You wash kedin, then you spoke the brick wall, and have to make a bracha. It can't go back on the Netilah. What then? It's going to go on the niguv? The niguv is not halachadik niguv. It's an akiyazdik niguv, but not halachadik. And Taka Rav Ozna in Chele Gimel, Simon Yud Beis, says this very tiny question, which I see all the time. Let's say you have a big oilam washing, whether it's in shul, or by simcha, or in a family, and people like talking. So as they're washing, they talk. In other words, he washes once the right hand, and then it finishes the conversation. The question is, till now we spoke about hefsik after you're washing two hands before the bracha, and that's that brick wall that really passels the ability to make a bracha. My question now is, in between first and second hand, are you allowed to talk l'chatchila or b'di'evet? So here, this is interesting, because you could say, well, so forget about the right hand. I have to wash the left hand. I'll wash the left hand, I won't talk, I'll make a bracha on the left hand. So what's wrong if I speak in between yad liyad? But then again, Rabbi, there's no chi of Netilas Yodayim on one hand. You have both hands, wash both hands. And just like for many hours we're very good, from the beginning of Shaifa till after the last Tekiyah of Musaf, we don't talk for hours because you want the bracha to go on the entire Tekiyah Shaifa, even though it's already yotzet, but we want to make a package. So why shouldn't Netilas Yodayim be one package? And that's taka why the halacha is not to talk bein yad liyad. Now here again, Rabbi Yashiv has a chiddush in the Ashriya Ish in Aleph Reish Gimel, who tak is mekel the talk bein yad liyad because the Netilah could go on the other hand. But the emphasis, Rav Sternbuch does not quote Rabbi Yashiv, but he says someone to say bein yad allowed to talk because the Netilah, the bracha goes on the other hand, and he says it's a big chiddush because the Aruch HaShulchan says that we don't make a bracha just on one hand if you're only washing one hand. So how could you go ahead to chatchila talk and separate the right hand from the left hand? So Lamaisa, I saw Levushay Mordechai in Talisah, Simon Yotes, the Ber Moshe, and Hey Mem Dalet quotes this. All say that Lamaisa, we shouldn't talk from the beginning of the Netilah until the end. Again, Kiyah Shaif, for many hours we don't talk. Yizicha could manage for a few extra seconds from the beginning of the Netilah, when you wash the first hand until you actually complete the Netilah, not to talk, so the bracha is chal on the entire Ma'aseh Netilah. Question, very common. Same scenario. Big oilam, a lot of people washing, you wash one hand, and just then you heard someone saying, Al Netilas Yodayim, he made a bracha. Can you answer amein, not stam sichas chulin, amein, between first hand and second hand? Or better yet, let's say you wash both hands. Before you made your bracha, do you answer amein to someone's bracha? So this, lamaisa, I could say one thing, which is pashut, that's about it. After you wash kedasu kedin, you made the bracha, and you dried your hands, and you're sitting by a table waiting for everybody to finish washing, or even in shul, you made the bracha, dried your hand, and you hear someone's bracha of any sort, then you have to answer. Not allowed to, you have to answer. Because you look in Shulchan Aruch in Kuf Samach Vav, Yesh Oimu She'ein Tzarech Lizar B'Lahafsik Bein Netilah Hamoitzi. There's no problem talking after Netilas Yodayim before Hamoitzi. What's the problem? This is a mitzvah Netilah, this is a mitzvah Hamoitzi. Now you said earlier, take a Netilah bracha, true. But if it comes up a chiyuv to answer, Kedusha, let's say you hear, if let's say in shul it happens to be, not only are you allowed to, you're mechuyev to. Because it's only Yeshayimrim, and the Shmachara's Lashon is Toiv Lizar. So between the Netilas Yodayim and the Hamoitzi, you're allowed to answer. But our case is fundamentally worse. It's in middle of a Netila. And I saw a very nice discussion in the Sefer Nachlas Tzvi Siman Gimel, who says that although you could say Ben Yad Liyad, maybe you could rely that the bracha goes on the second Yad, but we don't do that. We like to make the bracha on both hands. And he says, Shev al tasa adif, don't answer amein. Now I saw in another sefer, Noichi amein, I looked whatever surah I have, he quotes, in this Ahmed Reisha test, quotes of Chaim Kanievsky, that ben yad liyad, you're allowed to answer amein. I'm not sure exactly why. L'chayra and Svara, Shev al tasa adif is more correct, because the bracha goes on both hands. So at least we could say that l'chatchila, it's probably better not to talk, but even to say amein ben yad liyad l'chayr al tasa adif. And the last group I think we could say is a mitzvah lefarsim, in a certain sense most negeya, but I think maybe is not well known. Let's say a person didn't talk in middle of a suda. Again, we're changing location. In middle of a suda, a person went to the bathroom, or he changed a child's diaper. Okay, touch the makom b'chusa also comes up, but that shouldn't happen. But basically, a person has to go. B'kitza, my question is simple. In middle of the suda, till now we spoke about your hands are wet, they're not wet. Middle of the suda, do we have to make a new netila because he went to the Beis HaKisei, he changed the diaper, somebody asked me, he fell asleep by the table for half hour? Do you have to make a new netilas yadayim? He has the last minyan, he runs to mincha in the middle of a suda. Do you have to wash again netilas yadayim? And if yes, do you make a new bracha? So Pashit will say, let's talk about the case of the Beis HaKisei. Pashit, going in the Beis HaKisei mitzad adin is mechayiv a new bracha. But zich asiyas tzrochav is mechayiv a new bracha, a new netila. So the chayra, not only you have to wash kalacha, hilchas netilas yadayim, not ashiyatza washing. You have to wash netilas yadayim netila, but you should have to make a new bracha. Why? Pashit. You went to the Beis HaKisei, asiyas tzrochav l'gedolim is about to mechayiv a new netila. I washed till now, okay, but you have a new chiyuv. So l'chayra, you would have to make a netila, and again, this is my point. Not just like some people do after the bathroom, they wash once without a keli, which the Magen Avraham sanctions in Siman Dal, I think it is Sifkat and Yudches. Magen Avraham holds you don't have to wash with a keli 3 times. Once is enough. But after, in the middle of a suda, you have to have a netilas yadayim. You have to wash kedas ukudin with a keli twice on each hand. And the chayra, we find a custom-made raya. In Yuma Daf Lamed, Mar says, halacha, besuda, adam yoytze lahashtem mayim, noitel yodei achas v'nichlas. Now this is for ketanim, and it only touched one hand to makom betunif. So he has to wash the one hand. Please note that. Rashi says, because one hand became tamei, he touched the makom b'chusa, he has to wash that hand. Please keep that in mind. Let's say he was Masiach Das from the Netila. He spoke to his friend a long time, and Rashi is a very tricky lashon. He spoke for a sha'ah ishtayim, 1 or 2 hours. Now, make up your mind. 1 or 2 hours is a big difference. But the Rashi says, since you're Masiach Das, you have to wash again. So, based on Yuma Daf Lamed, we see 2 categories of Makom Betunif, he has to wash again, only that hand. And number 2, Hesach Hadas is Mechayiv a new netila. That's the Sugi in Yuma. Then there's a Rajba, quoted by the Shulchan Aruch, in Rajba in Chelik Aleph Kuf Tzadik Beis, that let's say someone in the middle of davening, in the middle of a davening or a Suda, touched the Makom Betunif. What does he do? So the Rajba says, well, there's a big chilek. Because if you touch a makom betunif during davening, so you need an akiyas. So just wash the hand, put water on the hand. But if you touch the makom betunif during a suda, oy gewalt, for bread, not enough just meat the manki, just a little bit water. you have to make a new Netilas Yodayim kalacha of Hilchas Netilas Yodayim. Tzarech Netila ubracha zok the Rashba. Now the svar is very easy to understand. Rabbi Yid, you washed earlier. You get credit for that. Wonderful. But now you have a new chi of Netila. Why should the original Netila help for now? Now your hands are tamei. So you have to wash over Hilchas Netilas Yodayim, not just sprinkling water from the faucet. Get a keli, wash twice, and make a bracha. Because the first Netila came to an end. What? Oh, we're going to get to that in a moment. And the Machab in Kuf Samach Dalet Beis quotes this Rashba, V'yavarech. Now, the point is, if you're sitting by a Suda and you're not Masiach Das, it could last. You know, the famous Magen Avram speaks about a long Suda, Dalet or Hey Shois. That's fine, as long as you're not Masiach Das. I just saw the Kamar in Kuf Ayin Ches Beis writes, a person should not leave the Makam of the Suda without making a bracha achrayna. And he writes, the Lashon, trust me, he says, Minhagi, by a Suda that Yom Tov sometimes lasts for 12 hours, he writes. I don't know how the logistics of that is, but I didn't leave the location for 12 hours. No, as I eat, till the time goes fine. There's no Haschadas. But I'm talking about something that interrupted the Suda. The Mechaben Kuf Ayin Sif Aleph quotes the Gemara in Yuma that I mentioned, that if a person went Lahatul Mayim, and he touched with his right hand, he has to wash his right hand. There are more adds, if he did Srachav, Gedoylin, then he has to wash a regular Netilah. And then the Shulchan Aruch in Kuf Ayin adds that if you were Masiach Das, we'll soon see what that means, a real Hesach Das, he has to wash again. So we see three possibilities. Touch the Makam B'chusa is the Rashba. That's the Shulchan Aruch in Kuf Samach Dalet. Asiyah Srachav is Gemara Yuma and Arachayim Kuf Ayin. Hesach Das is again Yuma Daf Lamed and Shulchan Aruch Siman Kuf Ayin. But again, the Hezber is because you ruined the original Tina. Now let me give you a little more Geshmak and then we'll apply this to Maisa. In Kuf Ayin Ches is a different sugya. And that is, when is a new bracha Rishayna required? Again, we're changing the location a moment. In Kuf Ayin Ches, the Mechaber says, let's say a person had a Suda, middle of a Suda, and he chapped, I didn't daven mincha yet. So he runs to daven, he davens mincha at home, that's what the Mishnah explains. So there's no chiyuv to make a new hamaitzi, because there's no problem with hamaitzi. What problem? In Kuf Ayin Ches Zayin, the Mechaber says, if someone fell asleep during the Suda, we had the Shal on Purim, people go to sleep, in fact. So as long as it's Sheinas Aroi, no new bracha Rishayna. Continue the Suda when you wake up. So the Mishtabura Ba, wait a second, don't forget, he has to make a new Netilas Yodayim. Now, the question is, where's the Yaisha? If you don't have to make a new Maitzi, why Netilas Yodayim? Teretz is Masik Midrash. Like Karvzel said, bracha Rishayna is tali if there was a Hesach Hadas of continuously eating, which you don't have. But Netilas Yodayim is tali, Rabbi, what's the status of your hands? If a person was Masiach Das from the Netila, so that's a Hesach Hadas. That doesn't mean it has to got to be bracha Rishayna. There's two different inyanim. If a person ran to Mincha, went in the street, and came home, that's presumably as a Hesach Hadas from the Netila. And therefore he has to make a new Netila. The point I'm trying to bring out is Netila could last indefinitely, unless either you have a new Chayvus, Asiyah Srachav, Makam Betunef, or a Hesach Hadas that passes the Netila. So let me read the Shulchan Aruch, and that's our first halach that I must mention. Misha Aymed Besuda v'nizga shenaga b'shaik v'yerech, he touched the Makam Mechusa, he has to wash over. So I saw the Piskei Tshuvas in Kuf Samadal, Ara 16, points out correctly that the Mechaber's Gloshin is v'nizkar, that means he made a mistake and realized it. But l'chatchila, one should not touch a Makam Mechusa during the Netila, during the Suda. Why? Because if he does, he has to wash over again and make another bracha. So you're making a bracha for no reason. So he says touching Makam Metunef should not happen. The person should be more careful. B'di'eved, then we'll talk what to do in a moment. And then he adds something really nice. And he said that the Mishnah Berurah and Kuf Nun Zayin Dalet quotes the Magen Avram that before a person starts the Suda, he should go to the Beis HaKisei. So Pashit, you look in the Magen Avram, is Al Pi Kabbalah. He says that the more halacha de kecheshbin. Because if you have to go to the Beis HaKisei during the Suda, you're going to have to make a new Netilah, a new bracha. If that could have been avoided, it should be avoided. Not that it's mamish bracha and tzricha, but if you could avoid making a new bracha, better do that. Okay. Now, the only question that Yutaka asked is, let's say I finished eating. Typically, I'm about to bench, and I want to make sure I have a guf naki. I go to the Beis HaKisei before benching. Now I come back, my hands are back tummy. Do I have to wash again hilchos netilas Yodayim dik with a keli twice? Or now, since I'm not eating anymore, it's basically washing for benching, which is very important, the kiyas. For that, once without a keli is enough, like many shitas. And the answer is correct, you're right. If you continue to eat, so you have to make an netilas Yodayim, not just nekiyas. You have to get a keli and wash kedin. We'll soon see about a bracha, in fact. But if it's just nekiyas for benching, and not just, benching needs nekiyas, but it's not a hilchos netilas Yodayim chiyav, then you could wash the way you wash after every ashiyot. So some people take a wash with a keli, say whatever. But if those that wash without a keli, that suffices here as well. Next question. Let's say you went to the Beis HaKisei before the main course or before the dessert, and he is not planning on eating any more bread. It's only other foods. So this, if you look in the Gemara and Yuma that we mentioned earlier, the Gemara says that if he wants to drink, he has to wash. So Rashi says, why? You don't have to wash for drinking. So Rashi says, Pashit, because if you're drinking, you're still eating, you might end up eating bread. So you see how weit this chashash goes, to be careful, even though you're not planning on eating more bread. If there's bread available and you're eating other things, even drinking, the Gemara says, you have to wash because you're still mid-suda. And that's mefurish in Kuf Ayin Sif Aleph. What I found amazing, the Magen Avram in Kuf Samach Dalet Vav, Mishnah Berurah and Sif Katan Ches quotes it. He speaks about, might be a hypothetical question, but you see how Chazal were tzitted from halacha. Let's say a person put a piece of bread in his mouth, and that's all he has. Before he swallows, his hand touched the makom b'tunaf. So does he have to wash? Or you're not touching the bread now, so just swallow it and give aide. So we would say, what's the problem? Don't be so nervous. You're not touching the bread. So the Magen Avram, you have to wash before you swallow it. And he sends you the Kuf Samach Gimel Beis. What's Kuf Samach Gimel Beis? There it talks about someone, let's say Nebuch, that can't wash his, let's say he's a cripple, and someone washes his hands. So the halacha is, if someone not washing himself, but someone washes him, so the person has to make sure that he has to wash, even though he's not touching the food, because someone's feeding him. But even though he's not touching the food, the person's an invalid, he can't eat, move his hands. So who has to wash? Not the one that's feeding and the one that's eating. So the Magen Avram, he's not touching the food. If he's eating, there's a chiv netilah. So too, our last bite, fellow. Now that's the Magen Avram. So Mishnah Berurah quotes it. Zok tainit the prima godim on the Magen Avram and the Kafachayim Alamu Arichis. I don't see the raya, because the person that's an invalid, but l'chal hapachas there's more achilas. So since it's an achila, he has to wash or be washed. Here it's this bite v'zehu. Who said once it's in your mouth and he can't touch it, then you have to wash? So Lamaisa, we have a machlokes in Magen Avram, Mishnah Berurah, and the Aruch HaShulchan goes with the Prima Godim. He says a Chumra Yisera. If you look in the back, there's a Goyis of Chaim Tzanza that he says that if the bread was in your mouth for that, no, it's not Chaim Tzanza, whatever. I knew that, but I didn't say that. But he says if the food in your mouth long enough, they lost Teresa the Nahama, then you can be makel. So to stickle of an in-between here, but no doubt about it, I want to say clearly, you see how the Chazal took this halacha seriously. One little bite in your mouth, you have to wash because Lamais, he's swallowing it. Because let's say, if the truth is, if you're right, if he could eat more, there's a problem. The shaila is, let's say he's at work, is the last bite of the bagel. Now, what I must mention, I mentioned earlier, but I'll highlight it again. Whenever you have a new chiyuv netilas Yodayim, in any case, It has to be a Netilas Yodayim chiyuv, the right way. Now, let me make a point. Some people, like I think many people, after Beis HaKisei, they will wash with the keli 3 times seirugin, like you do negelvasa, because you want to get rid of all the ruach ra. That's very nice. In our case, if you go to the Beis HaKisei for Gedolim and come back and you want to rewash, it's probably better to wash kalacha of Netilas Yodayim. Fill up the kais, wash twice each hand, take a revius on each, right hand, left hand, and then you want to make a 3rd time on each hand. It's probably more focused on making an Netilas Yodayim kalacha. If you mamish want to make a serugin, you could probably do that also. Wash with the revius on the right hand, then the left hand, and go back. Because then really that's enough for Netilas Yodayim as well. But we're going to get to that. But no doubt about it that you have to make a Netilah Kedas Sukudin. If you touch only the left hand, the Makam Mechusa, we saw Midin Gemara, you only have to wash the left hand. The Chayodam in Mem Yudches brings this out based on the Gemara. The next group of questions is if someone went to the Beis HaKisei, pardon me, for Katana Meraglayim, in a urinal, not in a Beis HaKisei, and if he, of course, goes like he is supposed to, he doesn't touch a Makam Mechusa, then theoretically there's no Chiv Netilah at all. Even not during a Suda. If a person goes like a Tanam, not in the Beis HaKisei Kavua, and doesn't touch a Makam Mechusa, there's no Chiv Netilah Yodayim. When someone's traveling, because I don't know that, if let's say he's in the woods someplace, if you do it properly, there's no Chiv Netilah. So then, Zicha, in this halacha, during a Suda, there would be no Chiv Netilah. But more often than not, if he goes into a Beis HaKisei Kavua, so the Kavachayim says, even if he lo yasa tzrachav, going in a Beis HaKisei Kavua is ready mechayiv Netilah. Now some say today is different, so that's a good tzarchian. But no doubt about it, a person that goes into the Beis HaKisei during the Suda should come out at least wash b'loi bracha. Changing a child's diaper, so like me if he touches soya, but even if he touches the baby's makam mechusa, that's mechayiv Netilah. We said earlier, even of a child. Now the emphasis, a child's makam mechusa is a little more relaxed because he runs around with less clothing. But changing a diaper, typically you touch that area, l'chayre it's mechayiv Netilah. If someone's mom is very careful, doesn't touch the toya, doesn't touch the baby, just takes off the diaper, no, good luck. Then in a chanami, it's not like his own asiyas tzracha, it's mechayiv Netilah. Someone, Hesach Hadas. What does it mean, Hesach Hadas? Good question. So Rashi says 1 or 2 hours. So most poskim say 2 hours. One is just a psachumra. The Tila David insists even an hour is considered Hesach Hadas. Okay, but you certainly can be makel because we said Mr. Burr says any stuff it can be makel. But if a person had a 2-hour break during a Suda, that he's not focused. In other words, you go to a Tish, a Shever Brachis, a 12-hour Suda, there's no Hesach Hadas. I'm talking about if there was a Hesach Hadas from the Shmiras Yodayim, then Midin HaGemara has to wash his hands again. Now, someone davened during a Suda, so Mr. Burr makes a chilik. If he davens at home, then there's no Hesach Hadas from the Shmiras Yodayim because you have to keep your hands clean b'tzad the davening. But let's say he went to shul and back, so that the halicha in a street is a Hesach Hadas regarding Shmiras Yodayim, which is a chiddush to me because if someone knows what he's doing, he's going to daven, he has to keep his hands clean for the davening. And coming back, why shouldn't he be thinking about the Yodayim? So I saw the Rav Steinberg held if a person knows what he's doing and he's focusing on keeping his hands clean when he goes to shul and back, why is the nuchiv Netilah? It doesn't have. You don't have to need a iyun otzum. Yeah, but if you're coming from a suda, your hands are washed anyhow. It's like when you go from Shal Shudas to Ma'ariv, you don't wash. I mean, many people don't wash for Ma'ariv. So if you're a focused person, l'char you don't need Netilah. The Tzais HaShulchan in Lambetes Tezayin is very clear. Amar misudase v'halach v'hiflig harbe b'dvarim. That's a problem. But if the shira flogim meruba, he says beishois. But if you saw mayada v'layasiach daitai mahani. We have the Shaila Purim, the Bacham go from house to house collecting. And of course they feel they have to drink, in every house. And what do you do with the bracha Rishayna on Agafen and Ala Gefen? A very, very confusing issue. Because Shina Makay, or maybe it's Halchei Derech. So I once told them, really, there might be the best eitzah if you wash for the Suda in the morning, eat a Kabeya, that's the beginning of your Suda. Then you're in the middle of a Suda, you can go from house to house. One Gafen pot is all the drinking. And bench sometimes Vuad Layada. And that works, the emes is, if you're continuously eating and drinking all day like they do. But the only problem is, Purim, I don't believe they're not Messiach Das from Shmiras Yodayim. But theoretically, what they could do, if they want to follow my Yitzah, it works, is when you get to the last house before Adla Yoda, and there you're going to bench, so wash your hands again below bracha, eat a kazayis of bread, and then you could bench on the whole day. But I have to be focused on that. That says I'm worried about the idea. But our question that we began with, when we went to the basic Kislamach, let's talk about the most dramatic situation. A person went l'gedolim and touched the makam mechusa bekitza. He has a new chiyuv netilah midin hagemara kamat. Does he make a new bracha or not? So the Rashba says even if you touch the makam metunav, you make a new bracha. The Gemachaba quotes it. Tzarich la'achzor lito yadav v'varech. Comes again the Amshel Shloima in Chul and Perik Ches Simon Mem Aleph with a radical chiddush. And he basically says the way the Rav in Siv Beis explains the Yamsha Shloima, Chazal made one bracha per Suda. Even though you have a new chiyuv Netilas Yodayim midin haGemara, there's no doubt about it. The Gemara says the Hesach Hadas, Makam Metunef, you have to make a new Netilas Yodayim. But a new bracha, man yemar. The Rashba, okay, he doesn't go with the Rashba. In other words, the Amshel Shloima holds where the Rav explains that even if there's no chiyuv Netilas Yodayim, but there's one bracha per customer. So that's his vart. The Be'er Halacha in Diva Masar Lachzor quotes other paiskim that agree to the Amshel Shloima. There's a long list in the Piskei Tshuvas of paiskim that say the minig is like the Amshel Shloima, that even though a chiyuv gama to wash kedasu kudin two times with a keli, but you don't make a bracha. Now the Chazon Ish in Chaf Heites writes it nicely. It's hard to argue on the Rishonim, but a mekel ein moichin biyodai. So what should I tell you? You know, this is very negeya. If a person that has a new chiyuv netilah, he has to wash kedasu kudin, but it seems the minig ha'olam has become there's no new bracha. But let me give you a little more geschmack. Let's say a person made a bona fide Hesach Hadas. In the middle of a Suda, he played basketball, whatever. Touching, jumping all over the place, middle of a Suda. Now he comes back to finish his bread meal, and he can eat bread. To make a new bracha? So the Rav, Kamat says beferish, that if it's a Hesach Hadas, even the Yamshel Shloima is made to make a new bracha. Why? No, beautiful. Because if there's a Hesach Hadas, it becomes a new Achila. So it's true, one per customer, there's a new Achila. So Ashiyot doesn't make a new Achila, Hesach Hadas does. But I want to make a point which should be pashut. Even if you hold you make a new bracha, that's only like regular Hilchos Netilas Yodayim. When do you make a bracha on a Suda? When you have at least a kebeya of bread. If someone just takes a bite to bench, so wash without a bracha. So here the Rav says this incredible yisoid, that the vart is, and Kaf HaChaim says it also, by the way, Sivkot and Tezayin, that the lumdis of the Amshel Shloima is that there's one bracha per Suda. There could be two netilas, true, but one bracha helps. If Lamais you have a Hesach Hadas, which is, and then you're going to eat a kebeya of bread, and it's a real Hesach Hadas, not a Safik. A Safik you don't have to wash. And last but not least, and that's what you mentioned earlier, the question is, let's say I'm going to follow Minig Olam. I go to the Beis HaKisei, I come back, I wash Kedas HaKadin without a bracha. Now what? Now here again, I'm in a shtickle of a no man's land. I don't know what to do here. You know, vi espendas, like they say. I make a bracha, I right away eat. I make a bracha, I light Ner Chanukah. No hefsek, even one word is a hefsek. Here, I wash Kadin, but there is no bracha. Do I have to go and eat bread? Can I make Ashiyotza first? Like, where do I go? Because there's a hefsek between a bracha and the next part, but here's no bracha. And the answer is, you're right. There's no real hefsek because no bracha. But there's the Gemara take of the Netilah bracha. So the Paiskim say, you come back from the Beis HaKisei and you're doing it like a mensch, do it like a mensch. Wash kedin and then eat bread. Maybe you could say Ashiyotza first, because that's not a hefsek, that belongs there b'tzad Ashiyotza. But anything that really does not need to be done, eat a little bit bread, the bracha is chal. I got to talk to you.
Shame Irgen Shir Telak Big Yeshakach. Joe Smith for today's shir. Tabs against Chus is sponsoring a shir. Call Egan Shir Terra 718-851-8651. Email ist@yeshivanet.com. After Kaddish, Mr. Smith will say a short sikkim for a few minutes of today's shir. Chananya Menakashe Motzar Bocho Zake says it's still a figure him on Torah Mitzvah Shenemar and Chofetz and on Sidka Yagdol Torah V'Yadeh.
One says no problem with hefsek. The lump is What? So he has nibble in between. You're right. Should have mentioned that. Okay. But he had a big suit, so in 2 hours. Lachas or leichas? What's the word? Lachas Yodayim? Here she says lachas. I'm surprised why. Yeah, good. Oh. Lachas,
okay. We gave a short half stick. I don't know if it was enough time for everyone to wash again, but if not, whatever. Anyway, the sikkim until Yodayim shenis besuda.
Okay, so one thing we can say, Netilas Yodayim can last until the Hesach Hadas or a psul of the Nitila itself. I should have mentioned that a long hefsek might be a problem in the bracha achroina because of shir equal. So either we're talking about a person that ate a big suda, but basically shir equal has to be considered. We're talking about Netilas Yodayim for today. Basically, during a Nitila, the hands are most vulnerable for problems. If the hands are still wet, amanas latviach, it shouldn't touch any other hand that didn't wash, whether it's someone else's hand or your own hand that wasn't yet washed. And in that case, if it was touched, the Nitila became puzzle. You have to dry the hand. You can't just wash over. You have to dry it and wash again. 2 washed hands that touch is not a problem, or a dry hand after Nitila that it's touched by someone that didn't wash or even has wet hands is also not a problem. A child touched you, you should wash over like a gadol. If a guy touched you, there's a makom be mekel. If someone touched just the palm of the hand, not your fingers, so there's a tzad that you don't have to wash over because that doesn't pass the Netilah. It's like if you touch the above the wrist on the arm part, doesn't pass the Netilah. So if you hold it, you only have to wash the fingers. So then touching on the palm will not be a problem, but the minig olam is to wash the entire hand. So one should treat as if the Nesilah was puzzle. Any makom b'chusa, of course, that you touched makes a problem even during a Suda. That's for a different reason. If you have a suffix, if you have to rewash, suffix drabanan lahakol. Once the hands are dry, you could touch someone who didn't wash. They are chassidim anshe ma'isa that don't shake hands or dance or touch anybody that didn't wash during a Suda, but that's chassidim anshe ma'isa. If lamaisa you passled the Netilah, lamashli washed twice, made a bracha, and then someone touched his hands, if it's a real psul l'chol hadayis, he would have to dry his hands, wash and make a new bracha. But the good news is that we saw from the Mishnah quoting the Chayodam that if you wash the reviyas, it doesn't become puzzle, even if someone touched it. So even though we don't rely on that l'chatchila, but regarding a bracha, we'll say wash again, but don't make a new bracha. If he touched only one hand and that one hand became tamei, so wash only that hand, not both hands. If someone spoke in between the Netilah and the bracha, it's a very unique problem. We don't have this typically. But here the Netilah is still kasha, but you can't make a bracha. So the aide is dry the hands, be matama the hands, and wash over kadas with the bracha. Much worse is talking before the bracha. After Netilah, before the bracha, that's much worse than talking between Netilas Yodayim and amein. A person should not talk ben yad liyad, and presumably not even say amein ben yad liyad. It's a mitzvah lefarsim. When we do have a chi of Netilah, we mean kedas ukedin, with a keli, with twice on each hand, or a vias. Not just the ashiyotza type of washing. The halacha is just enough, just sprinkling water without a keli. When there's a hesach hadas, so that's again, Rashi says 1 to 2 hours, you can be makel 2 hours, and there's no problem of shir equal, then you have to wash again, but the brachas remain intact. L'chatchila, one should be careful not to do any type of make a new chi of Netilah, because then you get involved with a child, you have to make another bracha on that. So it should not touch a makom mechusa, go to the basic kisi before the suda. If you just touch something or went to the basic kisi before benching, but you're not eating anymore at all, there's no chiyuv at all. If he's planning on drinking and eating but not eating bread, he has to wash al tzachashash. But if it's just before benching, so you could wash really just enough for the benching. The Magen Avram has a chiddush that you're supposed to go to the basic kisi before a suda. Now we understand where that's coming from. The Magen Avram has another chiddush. If you put food, the last bit in your mouth, and then you touch something, you have to wash your hands. Others are mafakbeik. But if you basically went to the basic kisi for Yodayim or changed the diaper, a real new Netilah should be made. Sleeping arai is not mechayiv a new bracha rishayna, but it is mechayiv the tilas Yodayim, unless a person slept in his chair, he fell asleep by the suda a few minutes, so there's not Yodayim askaniyas, you don't have to wash it all. A new Netilah again means din with a bracha, but the minig ha'olam is never to make a new bracha unless there was a hesach hadas and it's a new suda. And again, even though there's no bracha on the Netilah, but take it Netilas Yodayim, you're supposed to eat right after the bracha. With the Netilah, I'm sorry. Yes, sir. How much was it?